Hello everyone. Topic of this lecture is anatomy of the eyeball, anatomy of the orbital region, about orbits, about accessory visual structures and visual pathways. Before the lecture, we'll begin from the sense of vision or sight, how the sense of vision is provided by visual receptors, photoreceptors in the eyes that detect the light, color, and movements. And also we'll talk about accessory structures of the eye that provide the superficial covering and prevent foreign bodies from coming into contact with the eyes. That it is eyebrows, eyelashes, and eyelids, and keep the exposed surface moist, clean, and lubricated. That provided by the lacrimal glands by producing the tears. So, as you understood, we'll talk about anatomy of the orbital region, eye sockets, orbits or bony cavities for the eyeball, accessory visual structures, also known as adnexa oculi, and eye. We'll talk about anatomy of the eyeball and optic nerve and visual pathways. About optic nerves, optic chiasm, optic tract, orbital region. Orbital region, according of principles of regional anatomy or topographic anatomy, orbital region, it is a region of the face. Face, it is a region of the head. So orbital region is the region of the face, and that placed around the eyes, around the eyes. And if you look to this diagram, so this region is superiorly bounded by the eyebrows, and it corresponds to the position of the eyelids. Medial is bounded by the nose, lateral is bounded by the zygomatic region, inferiorly and laterally by the zygomatic region. Then some other regions of the face is forehead, nasal region, oral region, chin, or also known as a mental region on the Latin language, region of cheek, region of zygomatic region, etc. Eye sockets. So we will talk about eye sockets, orbits. It is bony cavities, the pyramidal shaped bony cavities. It has four margins, four walls. Apex of this pyramidal shaped bony cavity is placed deep to the orbit. Base of this pyramid placed externally in outer part. And in this presented diagram, we can see here the walls and margins. So first of all, we'll begin from the margins. We can distinguish here superior margin, lateral margin, inferior margin, medial margin. Superior margin formed by the supraorbital margin of the frontal bone. Medial margin formed by the maxillary process of frontal bone. Frontal process of the maxilla, it is a medial margin. Inferior margin formed by the part of maxilla and maxillary process of the zygomatic bone. Lateral margin formed by the frontal process of the zygomatic bone and zygomatic process of the frontal bone. So it was four margins, and this region corresponds to the base of the pyramidal shaped orbits. We have 4 walls. Orbits have 4 walls. It is superior wall, medial wall, inferior wall, lateral wall. Superior, medial, inferior, and lateral. And each did, as you understood, orbits formed by the bones of neurocranium and visceral cranium too. Superior wall formed by the orbital plate of the frontal bone, or orbital part of the frontal bone, and lesser wings of sphenoid bone. It is superior wall. Medial wall formed by the part of frontal bone, orbital plate of ethmoid bone, by lacrimal bone, and body of sphenoid bone too. Small portion of the body of sphenoid bone too. Inferior wall formed by the orbital surface of the maxilla, palatine bone, and zygomatic bone. Zygomatic bone. So this region corresponds to the inferior wall. And lateral wall formed by the 2 bones, it is zygomatic and greater wings of sphenoid bone. So it was 4 walls. Within this orbits, and on the margins of the orbits, we can see some openings that called fissures, foramens, notches, grooves. So name of the fissures and their position. Well, first of all, we have to begin from the openings deep to the orbit. It is optic canal. Optic canal. This one. This one is superior orbital fissure, which plays between the lesser wing and greater wing of sphenoid bone. And between maxilla and greater wing of sphenoid bone, we can see the inferior orbital fissure. On the orbital surface of the maxilla, we can see the orbital, infraorbital groove, and 2 openings of that called posterior and anterior ethmoid foramens, supraorbital notch, infraorbital foramen, and groove for lacrimal sac that transmit into the nasal lacrimal duct. So it was anatomy of the bony part. Walls of the orbit. As you understood, superior, lateral, inferior, medial, and everything is described here. Fissures canals, again, superior orbital, inferior orbital fissure, optic canal, infraorbital groove and infraorbital foramen, supraorbital notch or foramen. In some cases, it may be foramen, anterior and posterior ethmoidal foramina, nasolacrimal canal. Content of orbit. So orbit consists several structures such as eyeball, fascia, orbital and bulbar fascia. Orbital fascia, also known as the orbital periosteum, that covers the bones of the orbit. Bulbar fascia covers the eyeball properly. Muscles, intraocular, extraocular, also known as extrinsic muscles and intrinsic muscles, but intrinsic muscles are placed within the uveal tract, also known as the dilator pupil, sphincter pupil, and ciliary muscles. Blood vessels that provide the blood supply and venous outflow of the all contents of the orbit. Nerves and lacrimal gland, orbital fat. Eyeball fills 1/3 of the orbit. At the same time, other structures there fills the 2/3, the rest of 2/3 of the orbit. So in this presented diagram, we can see the position of the eyeball within the orbit, and some structures such as we see the layers of the eyeball, optic nerve, fat that surround the eyeball and fix the eyeball in its position, and extraocular muscles and accessory visual structures. And we'll talk about the structures in detail in next slides. Accessory visual structures we can divide into protective structures, lacrimal apparatus, and movement apparatus. Protective structures represented by eyebrows, eyelids, and eyelashes. These structures provide the protection of the eyes from the excessive entering the light. For example, eyelids prevent the excessive entering the light, and eyebrows protect from the entering the dust. Next, accessory visual structures is lacrimal apparatus that represent by the lacrimal glands, canaliculi, lacrimal sac, and nasolacrimal duct. And movement apparatus represented by the extraocular muscles, also known as extrinsic muscles of the eyeball that provide the movements of eyeball. So we'll begin from the accessory visual structures, from the protective apparatus, and in this presented diagram you see the orbital region, which represent by them eyebrows, eyelids, eyelashes, and some other structures. We can see here the eyelids, superior, inferior eyelid, and at the edge we see the eyelash, and superiorly we see the eyebrows, two angles of the eye, lateral angle, and medial angle of the eye. Opening between superior and inferior eyelid called palpebral fissure. Eyelids in outer surface covered by skin. Inner surface of eyelids covered by conjunctiva. That conjunctiva, it's made the conjunctival fornix, superior for conjunctival fornix and inferior conjunctival fornix that transmit to the sclera and covers the sclera. So medial angle, lateral angle. On the medial angle is medial commissure present there. On the lateral angle is lateral commissure. Superior orbital eyelid and inferior orbital eyelid attached by the superior and inferior orbital septum to the margins of the superior and inferior margins of orbit respectively. And on the medial angle also we can see here the lacrimal creuncle that has two openings for each canaliculi that transmit into the nasolacrimal duct for the drainage of the excessive number of tears. And so superior eyelids and inferior eyelids has the tarsal plate. Within tarsal plate tarsal glands that produce the oil, and openings of that tarsal gland placed deep or most inner to the position of the eyelash, and these oils prevent the overflowing the tears Lacrimal apparatus, this part of visual accessory structures or accessory visual structures that produce or secrete and collect the tears. And main function of this apparatus is moistening the cornea. Lacrimal apparatus represented by lacrimal gland, lacrimal canaliculi, lacrimal sac. Lacrimal gland. Lacrimal gland has two parts, largest orbital and smallest palpebral part. As you see by this presented diagram, lacrimal gland placed in the superior anterior lateral part of the orbit and open into the superior conjunctival fornix by 12 ducts, and tears that produced by lacrimal glands circulate along the anterior surface of the eye and transmit into the medial angle of the eye toward the lacrimal cravuncule. And two small openings, as you see by this diagram, that called lacrimal punctum. There's opening that transmit toward the lacrimal canaliculi. That lacrimal canaliculi provide the transmitting of the tears toward the nasolacrimal duct. First of all, lacrimal sac, and then to nasolacrimal duct. In this presented diagram, you see the direction of tear flow that produced in the lacrimal gland, and tears disperse across the eye surface, and fluid enters into the lacrimal canaliculi along the lacrimal punctum or puncta or openings that present in the upper and lower eyelid in the medial angle, and that transmit into the lacrimal canaliculi, from the lacrimal canaliculi into the lacrimal sac, and then to the nasolacrimal duct into the nasal cavity. We will talk about muscles of the eye. Before muscles, first of all, I would give you information about the movements of the eye. We can distinguish two types of movements. It is intorsion and extorsion. Also, you may find in your books information about some other types of movements, such as adduction, abduction, elevation, depression, rotation to inside, rotation to outside, and movements. In this presented diagram, you see the two types of movement. It is intorsion and extorsion. Intorsion is a medial rotation of the upper pole. We are oriented to the cornea, caused by the superior oblique and superior rectus muscles. Extorsion is a lateral rotation of the upper pole of the cornea, caused by the inferior oblique and inferior rectus muscles. Information about common tendinous ring, also known as the annulus of Zinn, is a fibrous ring that surrounds the optic canal and the medial part of the superior orbital fissure. On this presented diagram, you see the common tendinous ring, and as you see, common tendinous ring is surround the optic canal and part of superior orbital fissure, and that part of superior orbital fissure which placed within common tendinous ring consists the nerves such as nasoxillary nerve, oculomotor nerve, abducent nerve. Other part that not surrounded by the common tendinous ring contains lacrimal, most lateral, frontal is middle, and trochlear nerves is most medial, and ophthalmic vein too. And definitely it is optic canal. Optic canal that consists the optic nerve with ophthalmic artery. And common tendinous ring is site of origin of the four rectus muscles: superior, inferior, medial, and lateral. In this presented table, we see the extraocular or extrinsic muscles of the eye. It is represented by four rectus muscles: superior, inferior, medial, and lateral. That four muscles has common origin, as you see, common tendinous ring. And all that muscles insert to the sclera just behind the cornea on its proper side. First three muscles innervate by ocular motor. Last one is innervate by abducent nerve. First, superior rectus muscle is elevates the eyeball and together with superior oblique muscle provide intorsion. Inferior rectus muscles depresses the eyeball and together with inferior oblique muscle provide extorsion. Medial rectus provide adduction, lateral rectus provide abduction. And two oblique muscles that placed within orbit, it is superior oblique and inferior oblique muscles. Superior oblique muscle originate from body of sphenoid bone above the optic canal and insert to the sclera beneath the superior rectus muscle, innervated by the trochlear nerve and rotates upper pole of the eyeball medially. Inferior oblique originate from the floor of the orbit, lateral to the lacrimal groove, insert to the sclera beneath the lateral rectus muscle, innervated by the oculomotor nerve, and rotate the upper pole of the eyeball laterally. Next muscle is levator palpebra superioris that originates from the lesser wing of sphenoid bone above and anterior to optic canal and insert to the tarsal plate and skin of the upper eyelid, innervated by oculomotor nerve and elevates the upper eyelid. So in this presented diagram, we see the eyeball and its layers. Eyeball has three layers: outer coat, middle coat, and inner coat, also known as a fibrous tunic, vascular tunic, neural tunic. Also we can call like outer layer, middle layer, and inner layer. Outer coat or fibrous tunic consists or represented by the sclera and cornea. Vascular tunic or middle layer or middle coat represented by the iris, ciliary body, and choroid, also known as the uveal tract. And most inner layer or neural layer, it is a retina. Let's go to talk about each layer in details. First layer, as you understood, is fibrous tunic that provide the mechanical support and some degree of physical protection and serves as an attachment site for the extraocular muscles, such as four rectus muscles and two oblique muscles. Contains structures that assist in the focusing process. As you understood, most outer layer, fibrous tunic, represented by sclera and cornea. Sclera is white of the eye. Sclera is opaque, fibrous, protective outer layer of the human eye containing mainly collagen and some elastic fibers. Sclera is transmit into the cornea. Posterior 5/6 of the outer layer represented by the sclera, and anterior 1/6 represented by the cornea. So transparent cornea of the eye is part of the fibrous tunic, or most outer layer of the eyeball, and it's continuous with the sclera. In this presented diagram, you see the palpebral fissure. You see the eye, the white of eye, which is sclera, and deep to the transparent cornea, we can see the iris with pupil. Cornea, from the corneal limbus or corneoscleral junction, transmit. So it is a border. Corneal limbus or corneoscleral junction, it is a border between opaque white sclera and transparent cornea. Cornea is avascular. There are numerous free nerve endings in the cornea, and this is the most sensitive portion of the eye. And cornea made anterior 1/6 of the outer cord. And posteriorly. Sclera posteriorly, as you see, transmit into the covering. It's posteriorly, it is fuses with the meninges of the brain that covers the optic nerve. And this region is characterized by the fusion of the optic nerve coverings, such as durameter, arachnoid, and pyometer. All the three coverings is present here that fuses with the sclera in the posterior part of the eyeball. And posterior part of the sclera represented by the cribriform plate, and fibers of the optic nerve is pierces this cribriform plate of the sclera, or cribriform lamina of the sclera, pierced by the arteries, veins, and fibers of the optic nerve. And it is sieve-like structures. And also some other parts, posterior parts of the sclera, also pierced by the blood vessels, such as ciliary arteries and vorticose veins that accompanies that arteries. Next one is middle layer, also known as the vascular tunic or uveal tract. This region represented by the numerous blood vessels, lymphatics, and the intrinsic eye muscles. The functions of this uveal tract is providing a road for blood vessels and lymphatics that supply tissue of the eye, regulating the amount of light entering the eye, secreting and reabsorbing the aqueous humor that circulates within the eye, controlling the shape of the lens, and essential part of the focusing process. Shape of the lens will change because of muscles that present within ciliary body and iris. Ciliary body consists ciliary muscle. Iris consists dilator pupil muscle and sphincter pupil muscle. That muscles is dilate or the pupil and contract the pupil respectively, and provide the regulating of the number of light that enter the eye along the refractive media. Choroid. Choroid is posterior and largest part of the vascular layer or vascular tunic, is thin pigmented layer posteriorly perforated by the optic nerve. And structurally, we can distinguish 4 layers that called suprachoroid lamina, vascular lamina, the choroidocapillary lamina, and the inner basal lamina or membrane of Brook. Ciliary body. Ciliary body has at its periphery the iris attached to the anterior portion of the ciliary body. The bulk of the ciliary body consists of the ciliary muscles, a muscular ring that projects into the interior of the eye, and suspensory ligaments or zonular fibers of the lens attached to the tips of these processes. As you understood, ciliary body consists ciliary ring, ciliary muscles, and ciliary processes. Iris. Iris contains blood vessels, pigmented cells, and 2 layers of smooth muscle cells. It is a dilator pupil and sphincter pupil. It is the intrinsic muscles of the eye that provide the contraction of that muscle. The contraction of that of these muscles change the diameter of the central opening of the iris. That called pupil. Name of the central opening is pupil, and control the amount of light entering the eye, and also separate the anterior chamber from posterior chamber. In this presented diagram, we can see all 3 layers of the eyeball, and these 3 layers represented by the most outer layer is sclera, anteriorly is cornea, so 5/6 is sclera, anterior 1/6 is cornea, mid layer represented by the choroid, ciliary body, and iris. Ciliary body represented by the ciliary ring, ciliary muscles, which consists 2 types of muscles, is meridianate muscles and circular muscles. Circular muscles placed most inner. Meridianate muscles, they originate from the corneoscleral junction and extend backward and insert to the ciliary processes. And last structure of the ciliary body is ciliary processes. And from this region you can see the zonular fibers that extend toward the lens and provide the changing the shape of the lens. Anteriorly, iris. Iris, which represent by the iris, divide this portion of the eye into 2 chambers, anterior chamber and posterior chamber. And ciliary processes, they produce the aqueous humor. This produced aqueous humor is transmitted into the anterior chamber of the eye, and at this region is absorbed into the canal, name of which is canal of Schlemm. And this aqueous humor, function of the aqueous humor, it is providing the nourishment of the lens and cornea, because as you remember, it is a vascular structures, and also eliminate the waste, eliminate the products of metabolism from the cornea and lens. And most inner layer is retina. And this is a vitreous body. Centrally, as you see, this canal is hyaloid canal. So refractive media consists cornea, anteriorly, aqueous humor, lens, and vitreous body. Most inner layer of the eyeball is retina. That consists 2 distinct layers: outer pigmented layer and inner neural layer. Inner layer also called the neural retina, that consists the visual receptors and associated neurons. In this presented diagram, we see the two layers of the eyeball. Mid layer, which represented by the choroid, and most inner layer of the eyeball, which represented by the two layers of the retina, is pigmented layer, and neural layer of the retina, also known as the neural retina. And we can see here outer nuclear layer, inner nuclear layer, and ganglionic or ganglionar layer, which represented by the ganglion cells, and that axons of ganglion cells directed toward the optic nerve, extend toward the optic nerve. Pigment layer. The pigment layer absorbs light after it passes through the retina and has important biochemical interactions with the retinal photoreceptors. Neural retina consists of the photoreceptors that respond to light, supporting cells and neurons that perform preliminary processing and integration of visual information. Blood vessels supplying tissues lining the posterior cavity. The neural retina has a posterior part that is photosensitive, consists rods and cones. Its anterior part is not photosensitive. Anterior part of the neural retina or the retina is makes the inner lining of the ciliary body and the posterior part of the iris. Neural retina contain optic disc, which also known as a blind spot, macula lutea, and fovea centralis. Optic disc lacks photoreceptors. So optic disc don't have a photoreceptors, do not consist the rods and cones. This region also known as a blind spot because no image formed there. And just lateral to the optic disc is a rounded yellowish region of the retina that called macula lutea that contain a pit called the or pit or depression called the fovea centralis. In this area for sharpest or distinct vision, and this region contains the highest proportion of cones and almost no rods. So again, fovea centralis is central depression, or foveola in the macula lutea is avascular and is nourished by the choroidocapillary lamina of the choroid, and has only cones and no rods there, each of which is connected with the only one ganglion cells and functions in the distinct vision. In this presented diagram, we see the ocular fundus. And we can see here the central pit or depression, which is fovea centralis, which placed in the region of the macula lutea. And 3 millimeters away from this region, we can find the optic disc. Medial to this macula lutea, we can find the optic disc. As you remember, it is a blind spot. No image here. And also we can see their blood vessels. This method of diagnostic mostly used for diagnosis. For example, there are some complications of the diabetes mellitus. For example, diabetic retinopathy. Cavities and chambers of the eye. So we can find the two cavities, anterior and posterior cavity. Anterior cavity is space anterior to the lens. Posterior cavity is placed posterior to the lens. Anterior cavity consists of two chambers, anterior chamber and posterior chamber, which is separated by the iris. Posterior cavity consists the vitreous body. So refractive media represented by the cornea, aqueous humor, lens, and vitreous body or vitreous chamber. Next, we will talk about the structures. Aqueous humor. Aqueous humor, the anterior cavity consists aqueous humor between anterior chamber and posterior chamber. Aqueous humor. Aqueous humor, the anterior cavity of the eye consists of aqueous humor, and this aqueous humor removes the products of metabolism and provide the maintaining the chemical environment. Also provide the nourishment of the anterior and posterior chambers of the anterior cavity of the eye. And this aqueous humor secreted into the posterior chamber by the ciliary processes. Then it flows through the posterior chamber around the lens and down through the pupil into the anterior chamber. And in anterior chamber, with the angle, iridocorneal angle, it is absorbed into the scleral venous sinus. Scleral venous sinus, also known as canal of Schlemm. And some disorders of the absorption of the aqueous humor will call to the increasing the aqueous humor and will lead to the condition that called glaucomas, and it will lead to the blindness. Lens, it is transparent, avascular, biconvex structure enclosed in an elastic capsule. Is held in position by radially arranged zonular fibers. As you understood, it is a pre-equatorial, equatorial, and post-equatorial fibers. Flattens to focus on distant objects by pulling the zonular fibers and becomes globular shape to accommodate the eye for near objects by contracting the ciliary muscles and thus relaxing zonular fibers. Vitreous humor or vitreous body. Vitreous body is posterior cavity, placed posterior to the lens and anterior to the retina. Is transparent. It is a gel or gelatinous vitreous body which completely fills the space between the lens and retina. Visual pathways. Each optic nerve conducts visual stimulus information. At the optic chiasm, some axons from the optic nerve decussate. The optic tract on each side then contains axons from both eyes. Visual stimulus information is processed by the thalamus, lateral geniculate bodies of the thalamus, and then interpreted by the visual association areas in the cerebellum. And this presented diagram, we see the visual pathways that originate from the eyeball and transmit visual signal is transmitted along the eyeball into the optic nerve, and then optic chiasm, optic tract into the lateral geniculate bodies of the pulvinar group of the nuclei of the thalamus. Then from this region, information will deliver toward the occipital lobe of the cerebral hemispheres, where the image is formed. So if we want to understand about visual pathways, we have to understand the components of visual pathways, as you understood again: eyeball, optic nerves, optic chiasm, optic tract, lateral geniculate body, and fibers, optic radiata, and these fibers extend toward the occipital lobe of each cerebral hemisphere. Some features and properties here. We have to understand the image is inverted from top to down. If we'll imagine the eye here, and for example, it is a retina, and from, as you understood, this part of retina, upper part of retina, will get information from the lower part, and inferior part of the retina will get information from upper part. So for example, if we'll see here the letter A, this image will be inverted in the retina, and we will see the image like this. So A will place in upside down, and image is also reversed from right to left. Image is also reversed from right to left. We have to know about the two terms, about visual field and retinal. Visual field is this image, what we see. Retinal field we may divide into two parts: nasal retina, temporal retina. Nasal retina and temporal retina on each side. So temporal retina of each eyeball get the information and delivered by the optic nerve to the ipsilateral part of the nervous system, ipsilateral part of the geniculate nucleus. And same in the right side. The information delivered by the ipsilateral side toward the lateral geniculate body. At the same time, nasal part of retina delivered information toward the contralateral part of the nervous system, and make the crisscross. And this region called the optic chiasm. Optic chiasm, which placed in the middle cranial fossa, anterior to the anterior and superior to the pituitary gland. And from the geniculate nucleus, or from geniculate body, information will deliver toward the occipital lobe, that correspond to the Brodmann area 17 and 18. So this information will deliver to the occipital lobe, where the image is formed. Some other fibers will extend toward from the lateral geniculate body will extend toward the superior colliculi. As you remember, superior colliculi is a part of the midbrain that part of corpora quadrigemina that responsible for the visual reflexes, and so this region responsible for gaze reflex. Other fibers will extend toward the pretectal nuclei, of the midbrain, and this region responsible for light reflex. Other fibers from the lateral geniculate nuclei will extend toward the prechiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus, that responsible for the circadian rhythm. So it was visual pathways. And in this presented diagram, we also see the defects, possible defects. Some examples of the possible defect: anopia, hemianopia. For example, if we make a cross section of the left optic nerve, as you understood, anopia of the left eye, so no vision in the left eye. If we'll make the maybe patient will have a damage of the temporal part of the retina, fibers of the retina at this level, so it will characterized by the left nasal hemianopia. if the crisscross of the optic chiasm or some damage. First of all, we have to know about the position of the optic chiasm. It placed superiorly and anteriorly from the pituitary gland. If you remember, two optic canals open into the tuberculum sella, and the two optic canal open into the optic groove at which its optic chiasm is present. And this region, for example, some tumors of the pituitary gland may cause the may compress this region, and it will lead to the bitemporal hemianopia, because as you understood, the nasal retina received the light from the temporal visual field, and so that's why it's bitemporal hemianopia. So thank you for your attention. Goodbye.